Everybody, welcome to today's webinar. We've got lots of people on the webinar now, so we will get started. We had about 70 people register for the webinar today, but not everybody could make it, and some are waiting for the recording, I know. But we've already got, it's going up all the time. We're already at, we're past 30 on the webinar today. I think we'd expect about 40 or 50. So plenty of participants for some really hopefully interesting virtual discussions today. So my name is Tom Keat. I'm going to be one of your hosts for today, and we will do some introductions soon, both with myself and then also with Ellen and Shona. But I just wanted to start actually by going through some of the technical aspects of the webinar and how the webinar is going to work today. So I'll just bring up my slide on that. And I realize that for many of you, you're coming back. This is the third in a series of webinars, as we'll come to, which are related in the sense that they're all about the impact of COVID, but otherwise are quite standalone. So it may be that you're just joining the webinar today on the impact of fundraising of COVID. So what I want to do is just to explain to everybody really how the webinar works. So it may be something that you've been through before, but we'll keep it as quick as possible. And you should now be seeing my screen. So just a few points on the running of the webinar. So firstly, lots of people on the webinar today. So we're quite reliant on the chat function for the webinar, which we use, as you can see here, as a way of running our exercises. Just with the size of the webinar, the time that we've got, this works well for us to get feedback from the group and to share that feedback. If you do want to come in and speak, you've got the option to click on the raise hand icon there. But it may be, depending on the timing, it may be that we need to bring you in the Q&A section rather than during the webinar. It depends on how we're doing on the time front. The other thing the next point to mention, for the exercises, there's no pressure to join in. We don't pick on anybody to come in and to speak or to come in on video or anything like that. Again, we mainly use the chat function, but even then you can sit and you can listen and watch the webinar and engage with it in that way if you'd like to. It's completely flexible. So I think somebody on the last webinar was ironing. They told me afterwards as they were engaging in the webinar and then just sitting down to type in at various points. So that's fine if that works. It's quite relaxing. So you won't be brought in, is what we're saying there, unless you ask to be. We will be writing up the results. We're a bit behind on that. We're going to do that as a combined effort from the three webinars, along with the recordings in the next week or so, to get out to everybody, just with all the inputs we've had over the three webinars. So if we can't get to you today in the exercises, there'll be a way of representing your feedback. And there will, of course, be a recording available after this webinar. There's a couple of us recording it. And I think that's actually everything on my list. I'll just double check. I should say too that we're, as we'll come to, we're not, this isn't really about presenting or going through a long presentation to you, where we have got a little bit of presentation at the beginning here. It's not scripted, it's more just structured. We're just keen mainly to get your feedback and to give you a chance to also ask questions of Shona, who we will introduce shortly, just for any questions around fundraising. And I think that's everything on the running of the webinar. So what we'll do now, we're going to come in actually on video now, and just to say hello. Of course, I think we'll all be in our flats today, I would imagine. And then we'll come in on video also at the end for the Q&A. So if I can now bring in, I think Ellen, you're you're first in our list. If you wouldn't mind giving a quick introduction just for those who are new to the webinar today, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Ellen. I'm the Programmes Officer at UKCF, and I manage the programme's tampon tax. I and Royal London and a couple of our smaller corporate programmes as well. I've been there about over a year now. So I've previously worked at Mind, British Youth Council and UN. And I'm always looking forward to these webinars because my job's a little bit removed back from all the work that you guys do. So these are always really great webinars for me to gain insight on what's going on the ground. So yeah, that's basically everything from me.
Brilliant, thank you, Ellen. And Shona, I think I have you next on the presentation. Who's very kindly joined us from Women's Fund for Scotland to help us as our fundraising expert today. So Shona, could I pass over to you just to introduce yourself there?
Hi Tom, I can't start my video. I'm getting an error message.
Oh.
You cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Never mind. Well, you will be a voice coming into the webinar in that case, but that's fine. Yes. We normally do them without video, so it won't be any different to the group.
You don't need to see me. You just need to be able to hear me. Hi everyone, my name is Shona Blakely. I'm the Executive Director at the Women's Fund for Scotland, a post I've had since 2013. In terms of the tampon tax, I actually worked with UKCF on the application for the tampon tax in 2018 and 2019. So I was part of the team that secured the money that allowed us to give it out in grants to all of these wonderful groups across the UK. I have a background in fundraising. I've been fundraising since 2004. First for an organisation called Alzheimer's Scotland, then for a military charity, and then finally for the Women's Fund for Scotland. I was doing some number crunching this morning, and I discovered that in the 7 years I've been on post, we've given out almost £200,000 a year for 7 years. So that was quite exciting. I have experience of lots of different areas of fundraising. I'm part of a chat group, and we worked out there's probably 41 different streams of fundraising. So I will be able to talk knowledgeably on many of those streams. And if I can't answer your questions on them, I'll be able to refer you on to other organisations or websites that should be able to help. And I'm looking forward to helping you because I thoroughly believe that fundraising and raising income to support your work is part of the engine room of change. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shona, and thanks so much for giving up your time today to join us on today's webinar. I felt a lot more comfortable last week. It was on, not last week, last month was on monitoring and evaluation, which is very much in my wheelhouse. Fundraising isn't. Yeah, it's great to have you on the webinar today. And that just leads into myself finally. So I've been helping to lead on running these webinars, as we'll come to as our third. My background, as I just mentioned, is more on the monitoring and evaluation theory of change side, but increasing over the last 10 years, it's been a lot of facilitation and particularly online facilitation. Ironically, I actually started out as a fundraiser, which I tend to forget. I just was really bad. Not bad, I just wasn't very good at it, to be honest. So I'm keen to learn as well, Shona, on this webinar. I think I've improved since then, but wasn't really my natural area. So my role today, therefore, is on the facilitation side, and also on to help to get your input into the exercises as we go. I've also got my colleague Kelly on the call, and Kelly's going to be helping with just anybody that has any technical issues. She's been helping some of you I know to log in, and she'll be there in the background too, helping out. So just we'll keep the videos on just a bit longer. We've got a couple of slides just to, again, for those of you new to the webinars, just very briefly to explain what this what the series of webinars has been about. So as you can see, we're on webinar number 3. And this one, each of the webinars has been about the impact of COVID, and this one is on the impact of fundraising, and it's the final one in the series, which I know Ellen's mentioned too. We really enjoyed going through that's definitely, it's never felt like a job going through these webinars. It's been really interesting on each one. And we're learning a lot as we go as well. So finally, today, finally of our introduction. So today, as we mentioned, we're going into the impact of COVID-19 on fundraising. And the way that we're going to structure the webinar today, we've got an initial, following this presentation, we've then got 2 discussions. We say discussions, we've only got a short amount of time to do it. So it's going to be asking you to write into the chat box. And then as we've done on the last 2 webinars, we're going to share them in a brainstorm on the screen and hear from as many of you as we can. And Ellen and Shona will jump in as well as you both want to during those discussions, if it's something you want to pick up on as well. And then our second brainstorm is all about just any advice that you have as a group on how to improve your fundraising and how to adapt as we go into the new normal, so as we come out of lockdown. But then in a change to the format of the previous webinars, we wanted to make sure that we had enough time to get the benefit of all of Shona's experience. So we've got a 30-minute Q&A at the end with Shona, where we have a couple of questions that came from the registration process already. And then we're going to go through a number of your questions there. So as we go through the webinar, you'll see you've got a Q&A box. That's a good place to put any questions that you have as we go through. If you put them in a chat, Kelly will have a look out and pull those out ready for the Q&A. But feel free to type them in as we go, and then we'll do that Q&A at the end. So that's a plan for today. Ellen, any thoughts on or anything I've missed on that?
No, but if anyone has any specific questions around DCMS or project adaptations or extensions, please feel free to, my email will be available at the end if you want to drop me an email or drop it in the chat box and I'll get back to you.
Great. Perfect. Well, let's get started and begin to get your feedback. We've got now, there's 46 of us on the webinar today, so we've got quite a big group. And so our first question for you all today is just to find out, just to get the benefit of your experience here. And actually, we will just come off video. And the only reason we do that is because it actually gets in the way of the screen, and I keep forgetting where the video is. And then when you're watching back the recording, that's not ideal. So we're going to bring them back in the Q&A section, but for now, we'll turn the videos off. So our first question for you all is how your fundraising activities and funding sources have been affected by COVID-19. So for example, that might be that you've had to cancel or postpone fundraising events, which is a case for many organizations that I work with, or linked to that, it might be that there's a decrease in sponsorship from existing events, such as the London Marathon, where you've not been able to get that sponsorship income. So that was just a couple of many examples, but that's what we're really looking for. First of all, is just to get really to hear from you about your experience. Great. So if you can type in your responses into the chat box, what we'll then do is bring them together in our post-it note brainstorming tool, Linoit, which we've used on the past 2 webinars. So what we'll do is we'll go quiet for a few minutes just as you type in, and then start to bring those together onto our screen. Oh, Melanie, you've asked there just whether you also want the so this is Melanie Hall from the shop. You've mentioned about the positives as well on the fundraising side. Yeah, I'd love to hear that. So I know we've mentioned. I think we're dwelling more, I guess, on the challenges. But yeah, if you've had positive aspects coming out of this, I'd be really interested to hear that too. I think sometimes we don't dwell enough on the positive side. So that'd be great. Thank you. Great. So we're going to start to share your responses and bring them up on the screen. So again, for those of you new to our webinars, this is called Linoit. It's a post-it note tool. You can drop in post-its on the screen. It's very very simple, but it just helps us to start to add your feedback to the screen, and to where we can perhaps start to group it. But I think with the time we've got, we're going to be focused on getting your details up on the screen. If we don't come to you, and we won't be able to get to everybody, we will be including you in the write-up from the webinar as well. And it's totally random who we go to first. So what's happening in the background is my colleague Kelly is adding your copy and pasting your details into Linoit to the right of the screen, and I'll now drop them onto the screen and start to share your feedback. So let's start with Susie at Cotswold Friends. And you've mentioned that most funders have stood by you and were flexible. Some stopped funding, which I definitely heard about from other organisations too, that they had some funding stopped or withdrawn. You also had events that were cancelled, and then had to race to make deadlines to get emergency bids in, which I know is a common experience as well. But generally you were supported well by the emergency funding, and the main concern now is future funding. And so that's part of the second half of the webinar, is where we're going to look at the impact of, or what we can do to look forward in terms of fundraising coming out of lockdown. So brilliant. Thank you for that start, Susie. I'll just, it's like I'm randomly picking from a pile effectively to bring into the webinar. So Maria Viner is from CEO at Mothers for Mothers. So you've mentioned that community fundraising has ceased, and donations has also significantly dropped. So thank you, Maria. And Sarah, so Sarah, I'm not sure if I've got you on my list actually, because I get my list a bit before the start of the webinar. So if you could write in where you're from, that'd be great. We always just like to share where everybody is coming in from. That'd be awesome. So Sarah, you've mentioned having to cancel events and many of the 25-year celebrations, which we're going to link to fundraising. Oh, that must be tough. It's your 25-year anniversary. I'd be curious to know what you're now going to do with that, whether is that now, I guess, postponed till next year. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know what you do with the 25-year anniversary. So Sarah's from ELOP, E-L-O-P, LGBT mental health charity. So thanks for confirming that, Sarah. Great. So if I could come now to Claire at Women Like Me. You've mentioned you've lost out on receiving funds that would have been generated from a country fair, where you were one of this year's beneficiaries, which is one of the examples I was given just before, as an existing event that you're linked into that's been cancelled. So let's now come to Helena. You mentioned a similar point now. This is Helena from Womankind Bristol Women's Therapy Centre. You've mentioned fundraising events also being cancelled, which is definitely quite common. And Maxine, you've mentioned here just that so Maxine is from Women's Centre, a few events planned for 35 years. So you've got a 35-year anniversary. So you had, if I've read that correctly, Maxine. So and had a few events planned for the 35 years, specifically in theatres, which have now been cancelled. So two anniversaries so far. I'm really, yeah, that's really sad to hear. And Laura, so Laura, if I could just find you in my list. So Laura is from Sweda, SWEDA. So you've had to cancel all of the fundraising events and not getting any response from previous supporters. And that was going to be a follow-up question to you all, actually, was the cancelled events, whether you'd managed to find still go to those supporters, whether they were still happy to support you. I was curious to know. And volunteers are cautious about getting involved in any future events, but planning socially distanced fundraising is difficult. And when with crowdfunding, there are limits on what you can do with this, and you have to wait a long time for the money to come through and also pay the fee, which I did not know about. I've not really used a crowdfunding platform before. I didn't realize there were delays with that. Great, well, thank you, Laura. And perhaps if I could bring in my colleagues at this stage, so maybe Ellen, if I could start with you, any that you've picked out in the list, and then Shona, if after that we could come to you just in terms of your reflection, and this is something, if these issues are common to what you've seen so far from your experience. So maybe Ellen, just if we can bring you in.
I've been seeing a lot, it seems to be coming up quite a lot, that quite a few people have lost out on quote unquote normal funding opportunities, as a lot of funders have streamed it into emergency response or COVID funding. So in terms of like just having short-term funds and then the long-term impacts of what services people are going to be able to deliver next year. But on a slightly more positive note, I have been seeing, compared to the last two webinars, people point out some more positive things that have happened in terms of being able to receive. Some funders have got unrestricted funds available, but also just generally like a loss and just so many events cancelled, as you were saying, loss of donations. But also one person said, I can't remember what group it was, but they had a choir event that was hosted on Zoom that gained a bit of publicity and some possible fundraising income as well, which is good. So some interesting stuff.
Yeah, I'd be curious to get to that in the second part of the webinar, just about any sort of successes with online events and how that's been going, and if anybody has managed to get sort of a similar response to a live event. It'd be interesting to know. But no, thank you for also picking out the positive aspects coming in as well. And I was just as you were talking, Alan, I just spotted from Ursula from Voices, just mentioned here, because that was going to be a follow-up question I had for the group, was just about some of the challenges with going for short-term emergency funding, and Ursula's mentioned here that part of that challenge is the capacity to respond, to be able to go for these kind of for these bids. Because I'm just curious if the success of or how successful people have been really in going for the smaller or going for the emergency bidding, which I think in the back of my head I'd assume would replace at least some of the funding. But Ursula's mentioned here too, the long-term planning is impacted by focus on those short-term funds, but also, as I'm sure we'll hear from the group, we heard in a couple of webinars ago, all of this is with the background of there being an increased demand for the services that are being offered, while there's a challenge of getting sustainable funding, which I know is a really, really tough environment to work within. So Shona, I wonder if I could come to you. Just, is this picture we're seeing here that's to emerge from the group, is this something from your fundraising experience you're seeing at the moment in your role?
Yes, definitely. So in my role for fundraising, I'm a little bit removed from what's happening everywhere else because of the sorts of fundraising that we focus on. But this is the fundraising environment has fundamentally changed since March. There's very few areas of fundraising that haven't been affected by what's happened. Community fundraising has collapsed, events fundraising has disappeared, even individual giving has been affected because our individual donors, so that's individual giving, it's things like payroll giving or people who donate by direct debit, for example. And if they've been put on furlough and their income's been reduced or they've been made redundant, then that's all going to have a bearing on income coming in. And then, of course, trusts that rely on endowments to give out grants. The market fell in March, so people's endowments might be a lot smaller, which means that the amount they've got to give out in grants is going to be affected. And then we've got Brexit looming as well, so please don't forget about that.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I think the key thing is that those organisations that have diversified their fundraising and have been able to respond to this are going to be who keep investing in fundraising. I'm aware that many fundraisers, so if you think about the bigger charities, they've got fundraising teams, and they might have 30 or 40 people in a fundraising team. That's a complete and utter luxury. But I've heard of some big charities losing 30 of their fundraisers and they're only keeping 8. So that's the sort of impact that this pandemic has had. People's income has completely and utterly fallen to the floor in many, many cases. And you aren't necessarily protected if you're a big charity. And if you're a smaller charity, you might be able to be a little bit more agile and respond. And I noticed that it's Melanie Hall who was talking about her positives.
Sure.
And I think the key thing there is that they have a way of earning income and we're able to digitize that and put it online. So those are my thoughts on what I'm seeing so far. If anybody's got, I'm going to put myself back on mute now.
Okay, sure. No, thank you. And definitely we'll come back, Shem, to in the second part of the webinar into some of the solutions that organizations have had as well. And so I think around diversifying income, that topic will definitely come back as well. I notice here a couple of comments that came in, or I've been flicking through a list relevant to what we've just been discussing there, and also the challenges from getting I mentioned just before of getting funding from or COVID-related emergency funds. So there's a point here I thought was really interesting. It's from Anchal, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, from Women's Aid, just around the need to be alert, or as I read this was, but I'm not sure if I'm reading it correctly. I was reading it initially as, just being wary of where to sort of direct your activities when going for emergency funds. But I think I read it slightly, it might be actually more relevant to your point, Shona, of having being alert to new opportunities for fundraising there as well. Which we will come back to in the second half as well. Great. So I'm going to pull out just get through as many points of your feedback as possible, and some of which we will come back to in the second half, where it's looking at solutions. So I've noticed some of you mentioned as well on the positives, some of the innovation that's come out as well that we'll bring up in the second half. So Claire, you've mentioned here on the more positive side, so Claire from Women Like Me, you're able to apply for a small amount that helped create a herd garden for women struggling during COVID-19. Sounds amazing. Claire, were you one of the gardening projects from the last webinar, or it might have been the webinar before that came in? Because I know we had 2 gardening projects come in quick succession. Be curious to know. But great, but it represents there will be new projects that also emerged that have been possible through funding as well. So Ray from Westcliff Community Works, you mentioned being in the same position as Kate. So organisation is project funded with one to end in 2021 and the other in 2022, but not sure what's going to happen after that point. So definitely, one of the big challenges I know is that uncertainty about what's going to happen with existing funding streams in future. I know is a particular challenge, and I've just picked out Kate's point here too. So this is what Ray was mentioning in the chat. So Kate, you've mentioned that you're so Kate is from a DAISY program, and you've mentioned virtually all available trusts and grant givers have stopped their normal funding programs and are only funding COVID work for short-term limited projects. So that means we're facing a cliff edge at the end of the year. So I'll group that together with Ray's point there too, that's that uncertainty about longer term funding and what happens to the medium to long term funding. So thank you for that. And if we come now to Laura. So Laura is from the Wayfinder Women's Trust. You mentioned losing out on a 50K development grant from National Lottery as they move their funding to COVID-19 emergency grants. So that's a really common theme that's emerging, that there's funding there for short-term emergency work, and I can see some of the positives coming through. You're able to use that to address COVID, but that, what's coming out strongly here is that impact then that happens with the longer or medium to longer term projects, and what that does to those projects. So let's come to Jamila. And Jamila is from Together for Better Life. And Jamila, you mentioned existing funders have actually been very flexible to adjust the fund, which is great to hear. And I do hear that. And actually, Shona, this would be another question for you, is without mentioning any names of funders, don't worry, this is recorded. How have you found, I've heard a really mixed picture of some funders being incredibly flexible, giving unrestricted funds, but others who are literally just cutting off, where they can cut off, they're cutting off. I don't know what your...
Okay, so I've got a very Scottish perspective. I'm part of a funders forum in Scotland where several funders of different legal status get together and we discuss what we're going to do and how we're going to do it for the benefit of the sector. And every single member of that funders forum in Scotland agreed that we would keep our funding flexible. So funding that had been already awarded, we would keep flexible, and that we would give some funding to respond to the pandemic, but also that we were going to have a longer term focus and identify themes for beyond that. So in Scotland, I think we've had an excellent, as funders, I think we've had an excellent response to the sector, for the sector. But we are aware that there are some groups that will not survive. So some funders are being quite strategic with their funding, because if on analysis and research and due diligence, it looks like Group A won't survive, then it's less likely we'll give money to Group A, because we could give money to Group B, who looks as though they've got at least 3 years, future ahead of them. So I think the picture in Scotland's excellent. I can't speak for the picture in England because I'm not part of a funders forum in the same way. But I have a question for Laura M.
Okay.
I note it says that you lost out on a 50k development grant from the National Lottery. Had you had confirmation you were getting that, or were you going to a panel?
Great. Okay. So
because if you'd had confirmation that you were getting that funding, then I think you should maybe enter into a conversation with the National Lottery. But if you were going to a panel, then, and this is going to sound really harsh and I apologise, if you were going to a panel, there's no guarantee that you're going to get the funding anyway. If you see what I mean, it's a tricky picture. It's a tricky conversation to have with you, Laura. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. Basically, if you'd been told you were getting that money, follow up. But if you hadn't had the panel yet, then there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee you're getting the money. Okay, I'll put myself back on mute now.
Sure. No, but it'd be good to hear back, Laura, if you've been listening in there, if you can pop that in the chat box. And just to follow up on some of Shona's points. Ursula's mentioned, you felt Shona's point matches what you'd like to see. So greater flexibility on restricted funds and a longer term focus. It's not just the amount of money that counts, as there's been a wave of funding offers, but also the behaviour it engenders in funded organisations as well. So yeah, I know we're seeing it really varies from funder to funder. So just to be open to, because we want to make sure that everybody has we can get to on the call has a voice here. But I think Claire, you mentioned too that the Tampon Tax Fund isn't necessarily a funder who has been as willing to be flexible in terms of the timescales of funding projects, unless that's changed. And Ellen, I'm putting you completely on the spot, but that might be something you've mentioned to me before. So anyone who has any specific queries to come to you on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've been working with DCMS the past few months, and we've managed to negotiate with them to give the flexibility on extensions for sort of next year. As long as we keep all log of any change requests, it can run up till December, but we're trying to space them out depending on extension. So it's something that you need to go to your community foundation to ask. But in terms of that, they have been flexible with extensions. It just took a little while to get to that place, which is good. So in that way, I was feeling like DCMS weren't going to be as flexible. So it's nice now at the end of the summer to be feeling in a lot better place with them.
Great, thank you. No, thanks for the update. I didn't want to ignore a comment about Tampon Tax Fund. That felt I wanted to make sure we covered that. So thanks for coming in on that as well. And Laura's just replied as well to you, Shona, there. So the panel told them to apply, and after that they got to final panel for reaching the community's bid. It wasn't guaranteed, but the region's rep said it was rare for the panel to ask for that submission. So I think we can pick that up also in Q&A as well, if there's some follow up on that too, Shona, and any advice on that. That'd be good. So if we could just, we'll pick 2 or 3 more, and before we come to our next exercise, you can see our comment pile on the right hand side. We can only get to a limited number of you, I know, and that's why our write up actually is really important too. So Sharifa, if I could pick yours from the top of the list there. You've mentioned losing 4K a month by being closed, and that's income that was used for your core costs. And Tom, also, you've mentioned having to cancel fundraising activities, which was I've not really grouped these up here. We will do that afterwards, but the fundraising activities being cancelled was obviously a really big impact. So let's maybe finish on a positive point to take us into our next exercise. So Maria from Mothers for Mothers, you mentioned a positive for you was a Zoom choir recorded a song for you and shared on YouTube, and received donation from people not previously engaged with our services. So that's an example of an online, a new fundraising approach that actually got in or got you connected with a new audience, which is really interesting, and a very neat way as well of linking us into our next exercise. So I'll just bring that up on the screen, and all the time, if you have questions for Shona, if you feel free to type those in. Q&A box is the best place for them, but we'll be coming to those questions at in the final half hour. But let's come to our next point to get your feedback on, and we've already started really to cover this. So this is about what could be done. So as we're kind of, moving out of lockdown-ish, we're sort of, I guess, halfway in and out, not quite sure what to call our current status. But socially distanced activities are obviously now possible in most locations. So as we're now in this period looking forward, this is now getting your advice as a group about what could be done to raise funds more effectively. So here, this is my example, which wasn't very inspired, but there we go. So moving fundraising online, which I know a lot of you have already done, but that was why the point there I think was an interesting one. So that reaching new audiences because of that online fundraising. I know Shona's mentioned diversifying as well and moving into new fundraising areas. But based on your experience of the last few months, what would you as a group advise in terms of steps that could be taken to fundraise more effectively going forward? So that's our next question to you all. And again, I'll go quiet just for a little bit as we as you type in, and then we'll bring them up on the screen. So I would say too here, before we share responses, this can be both things that you are doing right now or you have been doing during lockdown. So I've lost my slide, I'll just bring that back. Or it could be things that you could imagine doing or plan to do, would definitely be interesting. So there's a chance to use, to be a bit creative as well. But we'll give another minute or two and start to bring in the responses. Okay, so we've had perhaps 2 or 3 in on this one, 3 I think on this one. So we'll start to bring those in and share your feedback so far. I noticed, Joe, you've mentioned from Homesite Exeter, you've mentioned we could all work for 3. That had a smiley face after it. So yeah, would be if we had a universal income, maybe that would be certainly be a possibility. So in addition, so we've got Maxine. So Maxine is from Women's Centre. So you've mentioned having to make improvements in technology, and that's true of Women's Centre, and you're running most groups online, supporting women via telephone, emergent visits and support, and also signed up to LinkedIn and gained some corporate support through LinkedIn, which is interesting as well. It's not a mode of fundraising I think about very much, but be curious to know, Maxine, how that's worked with LinkedIn. So yeah, what that process was of, was it putting or sort of making direct approaches through LinkedIn to get that corporate support? Maxine, I'd be curious to know a little more on that, if that's possible. So let's come now to Jamie at Warrington Youth Club. So you've mentioned one step that could be taken is to try to align projects and in turn funding requests with emerging needs of the community. So you've had good success with grant applications where you've been able to directly reference local need or community feedback and youth voice. So Jamie, was that, be curious to know if that was, it sounds like that was COVID related funding you were going for there, is that right? Was that COVID-19 funding? Be curious to know. Great, so we'll come now to Isabel from Southside in Bath. I'm just down or up the road from you in Bath. Yeah, we may actually be very, very nearby speaking remotely into this webinar. So Isabel mentioned making sure that information is available about funding needs and the importance of core funding on the website, make it easy for people to give, whether an individual, trust, company or community group. And many people want to help local charities at this difficult time, but need to be able to find the information, understand how they can help. A lower profile makes it harder to find new supporters, but if you have made contact following the information they've found on your website and social media over the past 2 months. Shona, we will also get your reflection on these points too. I think that's yeah, a really good point. I hadn't thought of, just making sure that at this point it's as easy as possible for people to help you where they can, or to find you and to help you. So Sue, you've mentioned having the challenge of putting activities online and thinking outside the box to be more creative and flexible before even looking at the funding opportunities, to make sure they meet the objectives and criteria of the funding. So I guess, Sue, that's that's about then adapting activities. So it's Sue from the Washington Group. So that's, yeah, about making sure that I guess activities are fit for purpose. And sorry, I'm reading through these. I just had a message through Lino. It's not sharing, so I've just made sure that's coming up so you can see these. But I'm reading them pretty much word for word here. So then Helena, just down the road from me, Women Bristol, using social media to raise awareness of changing needs as a result of COVID, and linking to a fundraising campaign in relation to this. So I guess that's interesting. So linking it to issues that have emerged through COVID, so increased mental health among women, increased domestic abuse. Then Tom, you've mentioned, so Thomas from Clyde FC Community Foundation. So Tom, you've mentioned looking at ways to be more creative in fundraising with large gatherings cancelled for now. I know one of your points was about cancelling fundraising events. So you're now looking at virtual fundraising and have a number of teams, oh, brilliant, entering the virtual kilt walk. Yeah, I'm gonna have to ask you to explain, Tom, on the chat what the virtual kilt walk is. Curious to know. Sounds amazing. And Jamie at YWC. So Jamie's mentioned here, so this Warrington Youth Club, that some emergency funding, you managed to get some emergency funding during lockdown. So there now seems to be a trend in emerging funds focused on how we support the most vulnerable to re-engage in their communities or to re-engage with services, which is interesting. And maybe actually, Shona, that'd be a good point to bring you in with your expertise. So is that something you've seen as well, that Jamie's mentioned here? So that trend in emerging funds focusing on supporting the most vulnerable to re-engage, is that something you've seen at all?
A trend in emerging funds focusing on how we support the most vulnerable to re-engage with their communities with services. I don't quite know what Jamie means. What I have seen in emerging funds is they've all been very COVID focused. And perhaps in Jamie's area, that has been connected to supporting the most vulnerable, because there has been an acknowledgement throughout this pandemic that actually our previous way of life had a lot of problems, and once we entered into lockdown, and once we took away some of the supports that people had, naturally, maybe it was just going to the library, maybe it was just going to a cafe. We saw who the vulnerable groups were, and that, yes, so that did lead to a new understanding of where the gaps were. So I think it's an understanding of where the gaps are and how that relates to the most vulnerable. An example of this is in Scotland, one of the things that we found we were making a grant for during the emergency phase of our grant making was data vouchers. So enabling women and girls just to get online, because previously they would have gone to the library, or they would have gone to Tesco, or they would have gone to a cafe and used free Wi-Fi. And you need that even to apply for universal credit. You need to be able to get onto the internet. So the digital poverty has really been identified as being a massive risk, but it's more the theme of digital poverty and how that affects vulnerable communities, rather than identifying a vulnerable community and realizing they're in digital poverty. Yeah. Maybe I'm just coming at a different angle. I hope that was
interesting. No, I wondered also, the way I read it too was whether that's also, because I imagine there's a point at which funders are going to move away from an emergency response and back to more development stuff. Funny, but I mean, that's a completely non-expert view. I just logically thought that that's what I wondered what Jamie was mentioning there too, is that, that focusing on re-engaging with community, re-engaging with services. I suppose I read that. We always read these in the way that we want to read them, I suppose. And I was wondering, so that I see there is that move back, or you're seeing that move back to.
Yeah, I see themes emerging.
Yeah.
And that various different groups might fit into one or more themes. And certainly the Funders Forum that I'm part of, we are looking to the future already and trying to work out, and as a group of funders, the thing that's driving us most is how we can best support the sector. So that is something that we always have, as you know, we imagine the empty chair and how we can best support the sector. So that's what we do. There was a question that came up in the Q&A. Should I just wait till later, or would you like me to answer?
Yeah, if we could, that'd be great, because we're nearing that point. If that's okay, Shona.
That's absolutely fine.
That'd be brilliant. Just to share these remain, but thanks for jumping in there as well. It was just because we've got a final few, so I think we can get through all of these and because there's some really interesting points here. So if we can come to Sue next, from Anchar Women's Aid. So you've mentioned here you're traditionally weak in social media skills. I personally feel that there as well. It's not my strong area. And now focusing on these skills, you'd like to learn how to increase the skills and activity levels, but found that new skilled staff expert may be needed to do as well, as it needs continuous effort, and funders are not keen to fund that kind of post, to get a social media staff member that would help you to adapt to this, to the current situations. Really interesting, thank you. Maxine, if I could come to you next. So you mentioned targeting, this was, thank you. This was responding to my previous question. So this was mentioning targeting through direct messaging organizations like solicitors and large local businesses. You've only got, have 4 corporate supporters so far, but that's now an annual income. I'm happy to chat to anybody about that. Yeah, that's really interesting. So just going direct messaging on LinkedIn to local organizations and then getting corporate supporters on board. Brilliant. Maxine, final question to you on that. Was that something that you've done in response to, since things have slowed down with COVID, or was that something you already had planned? I'd be curious to know. So picking up on the final comments here before we come to Q&A. So Alison, you've mentioned the focusing on getting longer term contracts signed, such as tenants and partners. So Alison's from the Hope Development Manager at Restore Hope. And then as you switch your activities during lockdown to more of an emergency food delivery, it's actually given many more funding opportunities. Interesting. So it's meant that far more people in the local community know what you do, which has made it easier to get funding. You've now launched a Food Life project, food delivery, as well as growing food on site, putting more focus on getting the families we support involved in food production, packaging and running food related courses. So you're now looking to create a farm shop, which could also itself generate income, and then also help the mums you work with to sell, or to create craft products to sell in the shop, which also gives a PR benefit. That's an amazing story, Alison, actually. So, and then you've regularly made videos to show what you're doing and to get the stories out in the world, which ties back to Isabel's point earlier about making sure you're going out to shout about what you're doing. But that's a really interesting example. So, Alison, question for you: were you doing food? It doesn't seem like you're doing food delivery before. Is that right? This was something new through lockdown that's led to these longer term funding opportunities, which is really, really interesting story. Thank you. So Susie, and I'll just find you in my list. So Susie's from Cotswold Friends. So a Tay Alert, I'm not sure, Tay Alert, for new opportunities. Some are now emerging to help cover the COVID recovery, but adapting services a bit longer term, or maybe you'll split a grant over 2 years. So that's interesting. So that sounds like funds that are covering not necessarily the COVID response, but if I've understood correctly, that organisational recovery from COVID, which is interesting. And Maxine, also in addition to your earlier points there, also signing up as a charity to using eBay for people to donate with purchases. You're not doing that yet, but trying to avoid Amazon as not believing them to be ethical. I have been a big user of Amazon during lockdown, I admit, but I can understand could be some challenges there. But eBay, and again, another forum that could be very effective for fundraising. So,
Tom, can I jump in?
Yes, sure.
So it's just about Maxine and her comments about avoiding Amazon Smile, as we don't believe the company to be ethical. Does Maxine, do you have a fundraising ethical policy? Because I'm very pragmatic about fundraising, and while I personally understand all the risks of organisations like Amazon and Amazon Smile, I would never turn down an opportunity to raise funds unless I had it really hashed out and explained in a fundraising ethical policy.
So I'd be curious to know, Maxine, if that's something you have in place. I remember a couple of years back, just in Focus as a consultancy, we had a long discussion about who we. So it is. Maxine's mentioned it is something that the board voted on as part of their ethical policies. That's interesting.
And is that related to the sort of organisation you are, perhaps? It's just if for example, if you had a major donor come along who wanted to give you lots of money and said, and whenever I do shopping online, I'll donate to you via Amazon Smile, how would you handle that relationship with a major donor? How would you handle that conversation with a major donor?
Yeah, curious to know if Maxine, you can respond on that. It'd be interesting. I know, Shona, it's a really tricky. We had this discussion ourselves just as a consultancy a few years back, and we could barely reach an agreement internally over who we would and wouldn't work for as a consultancy. It's quite it so came down to personal. Like we had very pragmatic members of staff, who took that to another level, who would just literally work with anybody. Because they would look to change them from the inside, and then we had some who just, were very, very limited. I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it?
So I've got a very good example. When I worked at Alzheimer's Scotland, you might not realise that there's an alcohol-related dementia, and so what we agreed at Alzheimer's Scotland is that we would take money from alcohol companies to invest in our services, but we wouldn't tell anybody that we'd taken that money, so we wouldn't publicise that relationship.
Okay.
We wouldn't list them in our annual report.
That's interesting.
And what we would do is we would tell the alcohol company, we're going to take your money, but we're not going to give you any public recognition, and this is why. So as long as we were transparent, then that was fine. And the other example I've got is health charities. They might not necessarily want to take funds from a cigarette company, but what about payroll giving from the employees that work for that cigarette company? I would take that money because they might not have a choice about where they work.
No.
So it's a really interesting area of fundraising, that in a time when fundraising income is at risk, you really, really need to double down on all your ethical decisions and make sure that they're absolutely defendable from every angle. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, interesting. I'm well into any sort of. I run courses on ethics in evaluation and research. It's my favourite course to run because it's not clear cut, but that's really valuable to understand. There are ways around that. Either, as you said, that it could be, anonymous or through the payroll or through, it's fascinating that there are ways through, especially when funds are needed. Just to respond.
With Amazon Smile, it's really a judgment call you're making about the individual donor and how they choose to shop. So that can be quite, it's just, you've really got to think, as long as it's defendable and you feel comfortable defending it, then that's absolutely fine. But I probably would never make that decision not to work with Amazon Smile. I would work with Amazon Smile.
Yeah, and Maxine's mentioned here.
Yeah.
I was going to jump in there to say it is a board decision. She doesn't make those decisions, but she agrees money's money, but she also sees, if funders disapprove of things we're involved in, it's a difficult balance.
Yeah.
But she's mentioned it was a good point that she's going to raise internally. And then Susie's also mentioned here, for a major donor, if you explain to the donor, he or she will often understand and respect the principles, and then look with them for an alternative way of giving. I think that's a really good, just building on your point there, Shona, that having that discussion. I mean, look, I'm sure a tobacco company knows that they are controversial, to give to it. I imagine they'd be used to having that discussion. That's interesting. Great. No, thank you for jumping in. That's really, really interesting. So just before that's almost kicked off the Q&A in a way, actually, which is great. So what I'll do though, I just had a couple of confirmations of people coming back from questions I had to them from their points here. So Tom, the Kilt Walk is a fundraiser organised over the weekend of the 11th to 13th of September. You can walk, jog, cycle, or do something active to take part, and people can donate online to the charity, and you're encouraged to wear tartan, and Tom is happy to wear his kilt. So thanks, Tom. That was my question to you from earlier. Susie, you mentioned it. I really should have picked this up. It was just missing the S on the stay there. I can imagine sort of people shouting at the screen as I couldn't work that out, but stay alert for new opportunities. So sorry, Susie, I had a brain freeze there as I was reading that out. And then Alison, you've mentioned you didn't, this is in my response to the question here about you weren't providing food or working in that area before, but immediately during COVID linked up with Chiltern Food Bank to help provide space for packaging, and then developed into fresh fruit and veg boxes and frozen home cooked meals made by a local hotel and chefs on furlough, and then that developed from there into this new funding stream and I guess business as well. It's a really interesting story. Thank you, Alison, for sharing that and for coming back to me on that. And then Maxine, there's a request from Rachel here to talk about corporate funding. We can definitely connect you up. Rachel, if you're happy for us to give your email to Maxine, we can connect you up to talk about that. Yeah, I think that's all the points here. So brilliant. Thank you for everybody who inputted there. Some really inspiring stories of hopefully some ideas as well for the group on that. So what we'll do now is we're going to come into our Q&A section. So it's the chance to, perhaps if Ellen and I will go between us and just ask the questions to you, Shona, that have come up so far. And then we'll come then to anybody with hands raised as well. Great. Well,
are you getting the questions in? Could I just have
yes.
Say something for a couple of minutes?
Of course. Yeah, no, please go ahead.
And apologies if I'm telling a lot of you things that you already know. It's just, I've got some key messages that I always want you to have in your head when you're thinking fundraising. So first of all, one of the things that I always want you to think about when you think fundraising is, what is the number one reason that people give? I'm going to tell you the answer. And it's because they were asked. So you must always remember to ask. If you're nervous about asking, you need to get over that. Sometimes they ask a grant application. Sometimes it's asking someone to sign up to direct debit. Sometimes it's asking somebody to put money in a jar. It's also, people give to people. That's one of the most important fundraising truisms. And it's all about building relationships. So there's a very specific way of working with major donors. And what I do is I take that way of working with major donors and I just work like that with everybody, because I think everybody deserves to be treated like a major donor, even if they're only giving £5 a month. I want to treat them the same way as somebody who's giving me £5,000. And also with Amazon, lots and lots of charities, women's aids, animal charities, they have wish lists. So Women's Aids will put things like, oh, we need underwear for age 5 to 6 boys, or we need pajamas, or we need pens. And animal charities will often put, oh, we need dog food, or we need cat litter, or we need animal enrichment toys. And donors enjoy going to Amazon wish lists and purchasing items from their wish list and sending it to those charities. And if you're signed up with Amazon Smile, you're getting a double benefit there. You're getting an item that you need and would normally spend money on, but you're also getting fundraised through Amazon Smile. So some charities where small capital goods like dog food or knickers or pens, some people have computers on them and laptops. You can actually develop a specific Amazon strategy and make it work for you. So I'm going to give you a website. So the first website I want you to look at is charityexcellence.co.uk. And the other website you should look at is the Institute of Fundraising. So I'll just put myself on mute and wait for.
Oh, and Shona, we can if you could send them to me, we'll also share them. Those links. I'd be curious myself to look as well. We can definitely share them after the webinar as well.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question on the Q&A from Maria Viner about me mentioning that large charities are making some of their fundraising teams redundant. What would be a good approach to recruit an in-house fundraiser at this time? I don't know about approach, because you'll need to decide on what your salary is, what your job role is going to be, what your person spec is going to be. But I know a great place to advertise that vacancy. There's a group on Facebook called Fundraising Chat. It's for fundraisers, and there are 13,000 members on it. It's a fantastic resource. You should all join it if you can, if you're on Facebook. And on the first day of every month, we start a thread, and all the job vacancies get posted on that thread, and it's seen by 13,000 fundraisers across the UK. So that would be a great place to advertise. Maria, I hope that helps you.
And we can share that too, Shona, if that's all right. If I can get that to share after the webinar, that'd be awesome.
So I'm just waiting for questions now. Is that
okay?
Oh
yes, sorry. I for some reason had put myself on mute and was asking a question.
All right. Okay.
There we go. It's not that I've been doing this for 10 years. I wonder if we could go to the couple that we had in the build up to the webinar, if that's all right, and then come to those from within the webinar.
Yeah, could you remind me what they are, please?
Yeah, I've got them in front of me here. So the first was about ideas and models for trading income, and also suggestions for recruiting monthly donors. So there's a couple of things within there, I think.
Okay, so the ideas for trading income. I think it's fantastic. Whoever asked that question wants to know more, because I really think that all charities are going to have to become more entrepreneurial. And if you do develop a source of trading income, then that effectively means you've kind of got a social enterprise, and there's funding available for social enterprises. So you could get 2 bangs for your buck there. You probably need to get someone who does that sort of thing to look at what you do and see if there's anything that you do that could become tradable. So for example, one of the groups that we fund in Scotland, it provides counselling for, the funding that we give is for lesbians. So it funds counselling for lesbians. And they also fund counselling for LGB and T, but they get money for GB and T, but they don't get any money for the L. So that's why we supported them. And they were trying to work out how they could raise more money. And I suggested to them, well, why don't you have counsellors who are professionals and who work for you, they're employed. Why don't you sell some counselling? Because there will be people that would like to pay for it, and then invest the income from that counselling into your charity. So that's an example of an organisation who thought they had nothing they could sell, realising that they do actually have something they can sell. So whoever asked that question, I need to know a little bit more about their organisation before I could answer for sure. But there's definitely ways to earn income. And then the monthly donor question. You need a good story. You need a good story to tell, and you need to ask, and you need to tell your donors why you're asking for a monthly donation, why it matters, and what the difference it's going to make and the security it's going to give you. And remember to get them to sign a gift aid agreement as well. if they do sign up to be a monthly donor, do you have the facilities by which you can claim monthly donors? Because remember, there's a distinction between standing orders and direct debits. They're not the same thing. A direct debit is where you go into somebody's account and take the money out. A standing order is where somebody pushes the money to you. As an organisation, you'd have more control over a direct debit, and as an individual has more control over a standing order. But you need to be something very technical called a direct debit originator in order to go into somebody's account and take the money out. Or you need the right sort of database and so on. And I don't know if you have those things. But then you could sign up with an online platform, for example, Local Giving or Just Giving, and they could provide you a direct debit function if that was something that you wanted to look at. I hope that helps whoever asked those questions. Great.
No, thank you. And then just to finish the questions from before the webinar, there's one more. What impact will COVID emergency fundraising allocations have had on the overall fundraising landscape for the longer term? So sort of picking up on some of the themes that emerged during the webinar there.
That's an interesting question, and it would be, the answer I'm going to give you is very much my opinion rather than fact.
Sure.
Because there's no way I could know that. But my opinion is it's going to change the way we do grant fundraising, grant giving for a very long time, because all of a sudden funders, the majority of funders, are more open to possibilities rather than having a very, this is the way we do it, this is how we've always done it, this is how we're always going to do it, rather than being so restricted. Everybody's just become that little bit more flexible and understands that need is so vastly different for every group that what works for one group won't work for another. So I think it's going to be flexible. The bigger funders, people with large endowments, they'll write it out. They'll always have money to give. I know in Scotland, there's one funder who was on a time limit anyway, so they were always going to finish after 10 years. They've decided to finish after 9 years so that they can spend their money sooner, but also cut down on administration costs for the 10th year and then put those administration costs into grant making. So, but it was always a time limited fund. It's just now it's going to be 9 years instead of 10 years. So it's changing, and it's up to us to keep an eye on it, really.
Great, thank you. I realise that's asking you to be a forecaster, a fundraising forecaster. It is recorded this, so we will come back to you in 6 months and chat,
okay,
if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Should we? We've got a few more here in the Q&A. I don't know, Ellen, if you've got one here that took caught your eye at all.
Someone was asking, and I don't know whether we can put something out or Shane can put something out about how do you register as a charity for Amazon Smile or eBay. I'm not sure how to answer that. But one I think was interesting was going how, when you're, from Laura Murphy, when you're a completely volunteer run organisation, how do you generate a trading income?
So for that one, I think you're going to need to have something tangible to sell. And you need to think about product rather than people. Laura, what does your organisation do? Maybe I could.
Yeah, we could bring you in, Laura, as well, if you would like to come in and speak. We're happy to bring you in too, if that's easier, or feel free to type in. Mm-hmm. I noticed earlier as well, in some of the early responses, that there's one organisation I call who was selling consultancy, and I wondered too if Alison's example of moving to a shop and selling products in, well, they're looking to create a farm shop. So I guess that would be another example of setting up a business. But I mean, again, not that that's all voluntary run, just as a couple of examples there.
With Laura's completely volunteer run organisation example. If, for example, let's say it's, go back to the example I already gave, and it's counselling. If their counsellors are volunteers, then it's just a question of asking your volunteers, would you be happy if we, out of your 10 volunteering hours a week, 3 of them we sold and earned income from? But it really does depend. Laura does say
I've
she's
got
happy
Laura
to
here.
talk.
Sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt, Shona. It's just I've got Laura to actually, to come in. Have I brought you in, Laura? I think I have.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Laura.
Hi. Yeah, we're a very small charity, and most of the volunteers that we have either fundraise or operate out of our drop-in advice hub.
Mm-hmm.
All of the services we provide are grant funded, and so we pay facilitators and coaches and things. So we do have a couple of people that will provide support on a pro bono basis, but it's very much limited to the individual person rather than going out and working with an organisation.
What is it you do?
We help women build their self-confidence and skill set so they can overcome the barriers that's stopping them from succeeding.
So it's you're coaching. You're a coaching sort of lifestyle type organisation. So the way I immediately think of that is there are women who will pay for coaching to support for mentoring. So if you have volunteers or facilitators that provide that, you could say to them, have you ever thought about, you know, out of your 10 hours that you donate to us, let's sell 2 hours of those to somebody that might pay. And then you can reinvest that money back into your charity. And the other thing that works a lot for donors is the buy one, give one model. So if you were able to say to a more affluent woman, you know, if you buy an hour of coaching, we'll be able to give an hour of coaching. That can be very, very inspirational sometimes. So that might be a way to look at it. So it's just taking what you do and looking at it completely differently and seeing if there's any way to earn an income from what you already do. And a lot of the time there is, but that's not to say every time there is. But I think you could do that, Laura. Women will pay for coaching, so why not offer that? But you would need your volunteers to agree and to approve. Yeah,
the majority of the volunteers we have don't have the skill sets. We've got 1 or 2 that do the coaching for us, and we can certainly ask. One of the reasons why the charity was set up was because we found that the women that needed the support didn't have enough confidence in themselves or belief in themselves to actually ask their organisations to pay for coaching or pay for it themselves. So it's a bit of a negative loop that we're breaking.
Well, actually, if you've got a suite of coaching that helps people build confidence, helps women build confidence, and women are coming to you that work for companies, why don't you advertise your services direct to the companies? Because a lot of private companies will have training budgets. And then the private company can say, oh, that's another way to look at it. Okay. So you're sidestepping your audience, but reaching them in a different way, because maybe a company will buy your services to invest in their own workforce. Okay. So it's HR departments and things. Maybe you should try and get an HR volunteer on your board of trustees and see if they can help you monetize what you do.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Do you know any?
No, but LinkedIn's excellent for reaching out to people.
Okay.
I heartily recommend being on LinkedIn.
Right, thanks.
And I'm on LinkedIn if people want to connect. My name's Shona Blakely. There's not many of us.
Lovely.
I was going to say too, there are 40 people on the call. If anybody knows of an HR professional who'd like to be a trustee, please get in touch. But Laura, so we've got a couple of questions, Jeff, and actually I noticed one of them was yours and another interesting one. So this was about running online auction sites. Would you mind just covering that question for Shona as well? Would that be all right?
I'll try. I don't have much experience with online auction sites.
Okay.
But there are lots of providers. A great thing to do for that one is if you're on fundraising, if you're on Facebook, join the fundraising chat group I've talked about and search for discussions on that, because it's a discussion that comes up quite a lot, and you get fundraisers being very honest about the responses they've had with various companies and who to avoid and who's good and the costs and so on. And when you're in a group on Facebook, there's a search facility. So always search before you post. But that's definitely a question for fundraising chat on Facebook.
Great, thank you. And thanks to Laura for coming in there.
Yeah.
And I think we...
Because there are specific providers that do online auction for charities. So you can avoid eBay if you wanted, if that's what the nature of that question is. But there are providers out there. You just need to Google them. Great. And then do your own due diligence effectively.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And would it be right to come to, I think it might be a final question here. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a question and a statement, but I think it's a really interesting one, but I don't know if it's in your area. This was about the legacy program. So this was from Susie asking if anybody had started a legacy program. The average length of time to receive a bequest is 5 years. It may seem a bit sensitive right now, but a legacy is often the greatest gift an individual can give.
So I used to do legacy fundraising. It's one of my favourite areas.
Okay.
I would recommend that every single charity has some sort of legacy fundraising message, and that you should also sign up all your trustees to say that they agreed to give you a gift in your will, because then you can talk about it a lot easier. 5 years, there's two different sorts of legacies. There's a residuary and a bequest. A bequest is a fixed amount, a residuary is a percentage of what's left. So you always want a residuary rather than a fixed amount. 5 years, I don't know about an average length of time, because it really depends on who's given you the pledge, and not everybody will tell you they've given you a pledge as well. And so you might get some fantastic legacies from someone you've never heard of. But that comes back to your relationship building. You might have built a relationship with someone over years through everything you do on social media, through your website, through your letters, through your annual report. And they might never ever have given you a gift while they were alive, but they might decide to give you a gift on their death. And it is a really important gift. I would encourage everyone to have a legacy program. And there is a move. And so if you think about, the baby boomers are alive just now, but the baby boomers are going to start dying off, and there is going to be the greatest transference of wealth there's ever been as the baby boomers die off. And so you need to be asking to benefit from some of that wealth. It's a fantastic area of fundraising. I was going somewhere and I've lost my train of thought. Yes, the move that's happening is people are going to smaller, local, more regional charities now for their legacies. So if you're a smaller, local, more regional charity, now is really the time to think about what your legacy fundraising strategy is. And while we're talking about strategies, there's a few key documents that you need as part of your fundraising armory. You need a fundraising strategy where you diversify as much as possible, and you need a case for support. Can I do hands up if you know what a case for support is? Does everybody know what a case for support is? That's one of my questions for you.
I think we can do a hands up for that. There have been some hands go up. So yeah, hands are shooting up. There are hands coming up.
Okay, good.
But some no's as well. I don't know either, to be honest. I can guess from the title, but
yeah, a case for support is your foundation of all your fundraising asks. So it's just who, what, where, why, when, and how. and it's 2 or 3 pages. It's your elevator pitch. It's the document that grabs the heartstrings to open the purse strings. That's what a case for support is. So I would recommend you all have one of those if you can.
Can I ask, do you have a go-to template for those 2 documents, like for the case for support and the fundraising strategy? Sorry to put you on the spot. You may not, but
I do for the case for support, but not for the fundraising strategy, because the fundraising strategy, you start from an analysis of your existing fundraising income.
Right. Okay.
So it could be radically different, but I could put something together to send you for both of those things, if that's helpful.
It'd be really kind. I realise this is all voluntary that you're doing it, and I've sort of definitely put you on the spot. But if you're happy to,
oh no, of course I'm happy to. This is my passion: helping groups raise money, especially when they're benefiting women and girls all across the UK. Will you chase me and remind me, Tom? Because I'm
happy to. Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to see them myself. That'd be really interesting. I'd come across the term, but I wasn't really sure now. Now I realise I wasn't sure what a case for support was, so that'd be interesting.
The website I refer you to, charityexcellence.co.uk. It's an absolute goldmine of all different sorts of, there's how-tos, there's lists of funders, there's lists of free fundraising databases. It's a really, really, really wonderful resource. That's charityexcellence.co.uk.
Great. And there's a couple of requests here to link up with you as well, Shona, if that's... they've sent LinkedIn requests to you, but I mean, what we'll do is put all this together in an email out at the end, and in the next few days, and then include that as well. But I just noted there were a couple of requests to link up with you as well, Shona.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'm always happy to link up with people, especially if I can make a difference for women and girls in the UK.
Great, brilliant. We're at the end of our webinar. So obviously my first step is just a big thank you to you, Shona, for giving up your time today. And I mean, I don't even work in this area, and I've been scribbling away. I
hope it's been helpful.
Yeah, I'm from the responses. I'm sure it has, and we'll. Again, I think those resources and links are going to be really, really helpful as well. And I think we got through all the questions, but please do, everybody, let us know if we've missed your question. You've got my email address from before the webinar. Feel free to send it over. And then, just finally, next steps. Very simply, big thank you to everybody for inputting today, and to Ellen as well, and UKCF for hosting these webinars. And my next step really will be to get out the links, resources, the recording, but also the links for all 3 webinars. We're going to get a nice page together, so you can go through those and the responses as well at your leisure. So that's all from me, really. Anything finally, Ellen, from your side at all?
No, nothing from my side. Just thank you, everyone, for participating. It's been really enjoyable for me to get to know your work over this past 3 months.
Great. Anything finally on your side, Shona, as well?
No finals. Just to say sorry. Thank you, and sorry. I'm going to have to leave right now because I've got to join another 3-hour Zoom call.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, we are finished. So I know you had to shoot off straight away.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go. But lovely talking to you all, and I hope it's helped. Thanks. Goodbye.
All right. Thanks, Shona. Bye then. And and that's it for us. So we will be in touch with the next steps and resources and recordings. And so I hope you all have a really good remainder of what may be quite a windy and wet day, depending on where you are in the world. So thank you all again.